Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the fifth annual West Virginia Game Developers Expo, this year in sponsorship and coordination with the West Virginia Cybersecurity Expo. I am Patrick Smith, and this wouldn't be happening unless for the sponsorship of two fantastic companies, one being Remake West Virginia, which is an Epic Games Mega Grant recipient, and the other being Mount West Community Technical College. So I want to welcome you all here to the first keynote here of this fifth annual Game Developers Expo. And today we are honored to have Jeremy Doolin here giving a keynote. Jeremy is a professor at Northern. He is also now a burgeoning game developer, and he's going to talk all about making his first epic project he's been working on, the Mega Project, and he's going to talk here in that giant project how COVID has affected that situation. So, Jeremy, thank you so much for giving a keynote, and I'm going to turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Patrick. First of all, I really wanted to thank Patrick and Mount West and all of the organizers for the West Virginia Game Developers Expo, not only for organizing this event, which has been something that I've looked forward to now every year since 2017. We'll talk more about that later. But also for the opportunity to speak. It's really an honor. I'm excited and have been since Patrick asked me. So definitely want to thank everybody for this opportunity and thank everybody here for who's watching. As Patrick said, my name is Jeremy Doolin. I'm a professor of computer and information technology at West Virginia Northern Community College. I graduated from Ohio University with degrees in computer science and math. Just last year, I finished my master's degree in information technology with a focus in cybersecurity, actually. Before working at Northern, I worked a variety of information technology and software engineering positions. And that does play a part in the story that I want to tell. I want to tell the story of the ups and downs of becoming a game developer. It's been an interesting ride. It wasn't even one that I was always certain that I was on. And for many years, I didn't even realize I was on this journey. Really had no idea that I was even on the way. Sometimes it's been a lot of fun, and sometimes it's been frustrating and difficult. And there were times when I wasn't sure about myself. I doubted myself. And there were other times when I was really confident. And so it's definitely a roller coaster. And when I was first asked to speak, I thought, well, who am I to be speaking as a keynote at a game development conference? I haven't finished my project yet. It's not done. I don't know when it's going to be done. I thought I did, but it's not. I don't have anything out there on Steam or on the Switch or anything. So couldn't you find somebody different who's been there, done all that? But the reason that they asked was because they feel that where I've been is where others are right now, and that I have been there and done that in certain aspects that might be very familiar to others. So the first part of becoming a game developer was just playing games. I got to grow up in the 80s, which was, in my opinion, a terrific era to grow up in as far as gaming goes. One of the reasons was because everything was so new. It wasn't like, we were expecting these new games that were coming out that we even had any idea of what could be done. The video game industry was just being explored, and we didn't even know all of what it could do. We had no clue where things would be going. So anytime you walked into an arcade, there might be a new cabinet there with a game that you've never seen that played unlike anything else that you've ever seen. And in the 80s, gaming was arcades. I mean, if you wanted to play the latest, greatest games in their highest quality, you went to the arcade. Yeah, we did have some home consoles. Of course, the Atari 2600, the legendary Atari 2600, which was the most popular game console of the early 80s and kind of forged the way for the home video game industry. But even if you got a game on the Atari, say Space Invaders or Pac-Man, it wasn't going to be quite the same as it was in the arcade. So if you wanted that authentic experience, you really had to go to the arcades. Having said that, we were still perfectly happy with our home conversions on the Atari. I loved Atari Defender, despite how different it was from the arcade Defender. I even enjoyed the Pac-Man game that was much maligned. It was really not a very good conversion from the arcade Pac-Man, but I still played it. But one of my favorite games was Pitfall. Pitfall and Pitfall 2. What's interesting about these two games is you could make the argument that they are among the, if not the earliest platformers. They're very early 80s, 81, 82. There was even a conversation that came up on Twitter a while back about what was the first game to feature the jump mechanic. I mean, the jump mechanic, that's something that we practically take for granted in any platforming game, but somebody did it first. And so the discussion came down to whether or not it was Donkey Kong or Pitfall. And I actually tagged David Crane, who is the creator of Pitfall, to see if he could weigh in on the topic. And he did. He actually responded, and he said that Donkey Kong and Pitfall were developed concurrently and without awareness of each other. So you could say that Pitfall and Donkey Kong both at the same time introduced the jump mechanic. But I loved Pitfall. It was a platformer, and I've always liked platformers. But then Pitfall 2 took it in an interesting direction. It was really kind of the seed of what we would call the Metroidvania style now. And that's what the screenshot that we have here. That's Pitfall 2. Instead of it being level after level, or instead of the first Pitfall game, it was just screens that were connected from the left to the right. Well, Pitfall 2 felt a lot more like exploration. Screens were connected vertically in addition to horizontally. And there were all sorts of nooks and crannies and places where it was almost a one-way passage, and you would have to go back a different way if you could get back at all. And it just felt like a huge game, and it was a lot of fun. And this led me to want a third Pitfall game. I mean, that's something that I think we can kind of all identify with. We just want a sequel, right? We have a game that we like, and we want a sequel. Well, the very first game idea I ever had was for Pitfall 3. And I was so excited about the idea that I actually started to draw maps for Pitfall and come up with ideas for new treasures and new enemies. And I wrote all these ideas down. And my sister and I even got together and composed a letter to Activision telling them, you should make Pitfall 3, and here's what you should do. I have no idea if anybody ever read it. And little did I know that at that time, which we're talking about 1987 by now, Activision was no longer making Atari 2600 games. Nobody was, but I didn't know that. So these early games started to get my mind working, started to think about what would I want in a game myself. This era was followed by the NES era, and I have very fond memories of trudging through the snow on a canceled school day to my friend who lived across town because they had an NES. I loved my Atari, but I didn't have an NES, and so we would just go to whomever's house had one. So my friend had one, and I would walk up there, and we would play Tecmo Super Bowl, or Metroid, Zelda, and of course, Mario. And I loved the Mario games from the very beginning. Then came the 16-bit era, and this really started to get my mind working about game ideas. A new franchise came to my attention, the Street Fighter franchise, and I became a huge Street Fighter fan. See, I loved martial arts growing up. I loved the Karate Kid movies. And I had recently gotten into like Bloodsport, Jean-Claude Van Damme movies, Kickboxer, and I just thought martial arts were so cool. And when I first played Street Fighter 2, I was blown away with how there were 8 characters with completely different styles. You know, you had karate and kung fu and wrestling and whatever Blanca's style is, and Dulcim and his stretchy limbs, and Guile and his military style. I just thought this was it. This was great. And the Mario games kept going too with Super Mario World. And so this got my creativity moving again. And I had several new game ideas. One of them was a Street Fighter prequel. And in the Street Fighter universe, in the lore, there are a lot of unanswered questions about why certain characters are the way they are and how things happened. So I wanted to see something like that. I also had an idea for a couple of Ultimate Street Fighter games that had characters from every game leading up to the present time. And on the left here is an actual character select screen that I mocked up. I want to say this was sometime in late 1998. I don't know how I still had this picture, but I do. I have had a few hardware failures where I lost a lot of the stuff that I created when I was in college, but this somehow survived. I also had an idea for an Ultimate Mario game, which, again, collecting all of the different features and characters and items and enemies from previous Mario games. I really wanted to see these. I was so passionate about these ideas that I dreamed about them. But I had no inclination whatsoever that I could do anything to make them happen. None whatsoever. But as you can see, I was passionate enough about it to at least put a lot of thought into this, to break out an image editor, which I'm not even really that good at, and try to visualize that game that I would like to see happen. Here are some game mode select screen mock-ups for my Street Fighter Dream Match idea. They were pretty low resolution when I created them, so they didn't upscale very well here. But you can see, once again, I'm visualizing what I want to happen. And this was the beginning, as far as I'm concerned, this was the beginning of becoming a game developer. So some lessons from this phase. The very first step to becoming a game developer is just playing games. And I assume that anybody who's watching this is already playing games. You're already a gamer. And you may be getting ideas already. Okay, and that's the next step. If you take it the next step farther, after playing games, and now you're getting ideas for them, that is the very beginnings of game design. Even if your ideas are based on something that already exists, even if you're trying to think of how could we improve, the Star Wars games, or how would I make the next Final Fantasy? How could I fix Fallout? A lot of people weren't happy with Fallout 76. How could I fix that? If you're already thinking about these, and especially if you're writing these ideas down, if you're drawing, if you're creating stories and backstories for characters, you are already becoming a game developer. Because game development is creation, and you're already starting that process. And so was I, but I just didn't realize it at the time. My next phase was a little bit more of a down phase. I call this presentation the ups and downs of becoming a game developer. The next one was certainly down, because while I really enjoyed playing games, and while I had ideas for these games that I passionately wanted to see happen, I had no intention of becoming a game developer. And one of the reasons was because most of my favorite games were being developed in Japan. I was a Street Fighter fan. I loved the Final Fantasy games. And this other game that I'm going to talk about here, Shining Force, made by Sega. Am I really going to learn how to become a game developer and move all the way to Japan to do something like this? Well, I mean, for some people, that may be a pretty attractive option. Well, for me, it wasn't. I thought I can't move to Japan. I want to live where I grew up, and I'm gonna start college, plan for a career. And something else that played a role in this, I graduated fairly high in my class, and I I would be lying if I felt that I didn't have some sort of pressure to do something really cool and significant. So when I started college, I went into physics and wanted to be the next Stephen Hawking. That's what I started with. I thought, yeah, I'm going to research black holes or quantum mechanics, come up with some new revolutionary theory. That's really what I started out doing. By the end of my first year, though, I had changed. I took a programming class because the physics department said we'd love to have a programmer in our physics department. So we'd love it if you took a programming class. No, it doesn't matter what language, just take one. And as luck would have it, the branch campus of OU Eastern in St. Clairsville, they had a programming class, and I took it. And I was just fascinated with this process. It helped a lot that computers were still fairly new to me at this point, getting into college. I started college in 1997. The internet was really just starting to get big, and it was new and fascinating to me. So this whole world of computers changed me. I decided I'm no longer going to be a physics major. I'm going to be a programming major. I'm going to be going to computer science, and I did. Meanwhile, I kept playing games. I was playing all the newest Street Fighter games. I was now playing Final Fantasy VII, and then later on Final Fantasy VIII. But I also kept playing some of the retro games too. One of my favorites was Shining Force. Shining Force, if you've ever played Fire Emblem, Shining Force is similar. It's a 2D tactical strategy RPG. It was also one of the earliest RPGs of any kind that I played, and it just immediately appealed to me. So Shining Force was something that I kept on playing years after it was new. It was new in the early 90s, 91 and 92. I was still playing Shining Force on the Genesis in the late 90s. Later on, that would switch to emulation, of course. But that kept coming back. Shining Force was definitely a major factor in this story. You know, you get those games that they just click with you. The style just makes sense. And if you find yourself coming up with ideas for these types of games that really make sense to you, you're even closer to becoming a game developer. There was another major factor, however, towards why I completely dismissed the idea of being a game developer. It really was a different time in this period. In the 90s, the internet was still really new. I knew lots of people who didn't even have computers. I can clearly remember my friends being so excited when they upgraded their modem from 14 kilobits per second to 56 kilobits per second. I remember that excitement. And I remember the Windows 95 mania when people were buying Windows 95 and then asking at the checkout what to do with it. And they said, well, you install it on your computer. And people said, we need a computer? Microsoft's marketing was so good, people who didn't have computers were buying Windows 95. And this really kickstarted the internet phenomenon. But it was still pretty small then. We just didn't have independent game development resources. I had no clue how they were made. I thought that was, fancy software that you could only see once you got behind the doors of Capcom and Squaresoft. You could make your own games if you were a programmer, but you had a lot of work ahead of you. The resources just weren't there. And there wasn't even an indie game scene to speak of. My gaming world was the console. I played a few PC games here and there, but we've got nothing like the indie game scene that we have now. So it really was a part of the time that I grew up in as well, why I dismissed the idea of being a game developer. So when I graduated, I had no intent to ever develop games. I was going to go into IT and software engineering, and I did. But looking back, there are some lessons to learn from this phase of dismissal. Just because it wasn't the right time then doesn't mean it never would be. And I do think that I can make a pretty good case that it really wasn't the right choice then, especially as a career. Game development as a career would have been a bad idea for me at the time. Doesn't mean I couldn't have done it, but knowing myself, it wouldn't have worked. I wouldn't have been able to work on the games that I wanted to. But I also, looking back, I really could have learned a lot more. I was so dismissive of the idea that I didn't give it enough of a chance. It really would have helped if I'd explored the PC game industry, because it turns out there were a lot of people making their own little games on the PC that I just didn't know about because I didn't even have one. I mean, that played a part of it too. Once again, it was a different time. I didn't even have a computer growing up. Something else that I learned from this phase is you don't have to work on games from your favorite franchise. See, I was so stuck on wanting to make the next great Street Fighter game or the next Shining Force or this wonderful Mario game. I was so focused on that I didn't really give the idea of making my own brand new games any credit whatsoever. So you don't have to. Yes, you may have your favorite games, and that's fine. That's good. Let those be inspiration. But you don't have to work on those if you want to get into game development. Do your own thing. Come up with your own original ideas. I know that I found that when I started getting my original ideas, it became even more exciting than the idea of making the next great Street Fighter. However, even if you do have those ideas based on other games, don't toss those out. Your ideas to improve those games may be something that you can later on incorporate in your own more original idea. So this was a down phase. I still wasn't even really giving the idea very much credit. But something happened. I got an intense curiosity about it. I kept coming back to it. Every so often, I would be writing code for something completely unrelated, and something would just make me think of how would I do this in a video game? And so I really did. I kept coming back to the question, and I don't know how many small projects I started just to play around with it. Just little C and C++ programs, just kind of fooling around with character objects and items. And I kept coming up with more and more ideas for this tactical RPG, what I wanted it to be. I even started to write some code in, of all languages, Lisp. Now, I happen to be a fan of the Lisp language. It's one of those you either love it or hate it kind of situations. A lot of people like to say that it stands for lots of incredibly stupid parentheses. I was always fascinated by it, but the more I learned about it, the more fascinated I got. And I got so fascinated with it that I thought, hey, I'm going to make a game in Lisp. Wouldn't that be cool? And it actually, as it turns out, there are companies that have used Lisp for programming games. Anybody ever play Crash Bandicoot? Lisp was heavily involved with that game. So what you see in that little picture is just a small screenshot of a little bit of code that I had written for how to apply a stat boost to an RPG character. There was nothing graphical about this code at all. It didn't even really run a program. It was more like an exercise, a mental exercise of, if I was going to write game code, how would I do it? So if you find yourself doing this, especially if you're a programmer, if you happen to be a programmer and you're looking at game development, and you find yourself wondering, how would I make this work? And even getting out your code editor and trying to make a little bit of it work, you're taking another step towards game development. But I'll say this, learning game development without trying to research anything at all about how it's done is a challenge. And one of my problems here was that I wasn't really looking up how game development was done. I was just trying it. I was just writing code and seeing what I could get to work. It was almost a bit of a, if I don't do this entirely myself, then I haven't actually done it type of attitude. That wasn't a very productive attitude to have. Thankfully, I changed it. I actually bought a book called Land of Lisp by Conrad Barsky. That it's designed to teach you the Lisp language by writing games, but they're not video games, they're text-based games. And so for a while, I wrote a lot of these text-based games. I found it fun to write these. I wrote a Yahtzee game. In fact, there are a lot of different variations of the game of Yahtzee. If you go out, if you look it up online, you can see that there's a game called Generala, one called Cheerio, one called Yacht. There's Nordic Yahtzee. There's one called Kismet. And I loved the Yahtzee game so much, played it a lot when I was a kid, that I wanted to write my own Yahtzee game. I didn't know how to do it graphically, though, so I wrote a text-based version, and it worked. There was also a code-breaking game called Mastermind, color-based code-breaking, where there are 4 colors. One player sets up 4 colors, and the other player has to guess the code. And so the only thing that the player who created the code can tell you, with every guess, they give you feedback. A black peg means you guessed one of the colors and it's in the right spot. A white peg means you guessed one of the colors, but it's in the wrong spot. Well, I loved playing Mastermind, but not a lot of other people did, so I wrote my own version so that I could play against the computer. I wrote these in Lisp, and I still have them. I actually just uploaded them to GitHub in case anybody's interested in seeing what these look like and you want to try them yourself. They're on, you have the GitHub URL, github.com/Doolinius/Lisp-games. Go ahead and try them out. I also got curious about writing code for the Atari 2600. Now, that's an odd step to make. And really, the reason that I got curious about it is because I discovered this really active homebrew community for the Atari. And I saw that there were all of these really well done Atari games still being made by programmers. There was even a programmer that made a better Pac-Man for the Atari. And by better, it is much better. I was fascinated that people were still doing this. And I couldn't help but ask the question, how do you do that? How do you make an Atari 2600 game? Do the tools still exist? Well, the tools that were used in the 70s and 80s may not be the same, but you can still do it. And so I just had to look into it and research it. And I got fascinated enough to try it out. So my very first attempt at writing a video game was for the Atari 2600. And you see there's a little animation of what I was trying. I'm a big fan of the game Ikaruga. It was on the Dreamcast and the GameCube. And I think it's also been released for maybe Xbox Live Arcade. But it was this really cool vertical shooting game where your ship could be switched colors between black and white. And if your color was white, black bullets would kill you. If your color was black, white bullets would kill you. And the enemies were also all black and white as well. And that would affect how the game played. Well, this was about as far as I got. I've got my little ship. I can move them around, and I can flip the colors back and forth. But programming the Atari 2600 is really hard, very hard. But it's still a lot of fun. I had to learn assembly language to do it. The next big step for me, and this is not going to be true for everybody else, but the next big step for me was teaching. I became a teacher at Northern, which I've now been doing. I'm in my 9th year, and it is the most fun, best job that I've ever had. I really, really enjoy it. And teaching programming is one of my favorite parts. When I was teaching these programming classes early on, I noticed that using game examples really helped a lot. It helped to visualize some of the concepts that we were teaching. And the students were definitely able to relate to it. So it became a really useful teaching tool. And in class, and we have actually just been doing this the last few weeks in the Python class that I teach, we were making these little melee code examples. Once again, text-based. And it's a little like a text-based old-style Final Fantasy battle, where it's menu-driven. You select your action, you pick your target, and then everything else happens with a random number generator. But they're still really fun, and they're very good for teaching code. It's almost like the students get to watch me code, and then they get to contribute to the project as well in homework assignments. But these examples, they kept this curiosity going. My curiosity was just so intense. I wanted to try it. I kept coming back to it. And so to relate this to anybody looking to become a game developer, if you keep coming back to it, if the curiosity just doesn't go away, you might be a game developer. Okay? This inspired me eventually. I just couldn't help it anymore. I couldn't stand it. I had to try game development. I was like, let's really try to make something, maybe something small, and let's use Python. Python was the language that I used most often in teaching classes. It was fresh in my head. I decided to abandon Lisp and move to Python. And I thought, you know what the perfect game would be for this? That old tactical RPG. I'm going to make a small tactical RPG video game. So this was definitely a more up phase. The curiosity was there, and I just kept coming back, and I kept finding these little projects like the Atari games and the text-based games. I just couldn't stop. They kept coming back, and I would have to get into a new one. So if you keep coming back to it, you really should think about giving game development a try. If it's something, you try it a little bit here, and then you think, nah, I can't do this. But you keep coming back. The curiosity is still there. I suggest really giving it a shot. I also think that it's a great idea, and it's perfectly fine to start out with very small text-based games. I mean, they're not video games, but it still teaches a lot more about games than you would think. Like, for example, the Yahtzee game. I have to figure out a turn system. I needed to implement how to make turns work. And I had to create objects representing game objects, like Yahtzee scorecards. Okay, and this translates really well to developing other aspects of video games. So just because it's not a video game, it's a text-based game, doesn't mean you're not learning valuable things. And looking back, I can see how much it helped writing those. Once again, don't throw away those earlier game ideas. Keep them going. I kept mine. Something else that came in handy as well. I didn't originally plan on mentioning this, but as a child of the 80s and the 90s, Dungeons and Dragons was one of my favorite activities. I didn't get into it until the 90s in second edition, but a friend of mine, actually 3 friends of mine, would get together and play Dungeons and Dragons. And I loved playing Dungeons and Dragons, but I also realized I think I want to be a DM. I think that's what I want to do. I love playing, but I really want to be a DM. So I bought the Dungeon Master's Guide, and I started creating a world for a D&D campaign. And I did. I created this campaign, and I had my friends play through it. In hindsight, there were lots of very lame things about that campaign that I would never do now, but that doesn't matter. It was that act of creation and creating these worlds and coming up with characters, stories. So I guess you could say that if you find yourself enjoying things like being a DM in D&D, you may also have what it takes to be a game developer. All right, so lastly, from the curiosity phase, I have one significant thing to suggest. Do not start out with Atari 2600 development. It's fun. It's a worthy exercise. You may love it, but don't start with it. And I can give you a little bit of an idea why. One is that you have to use assembly language. That alone makes it a challenge. But when you make a video game, what you're really doing is drawing pictures to the screen, hopefully at 60 frames per second. You're drawing a picture to the screen 60 times per second based on your input and the game logic. You don't do this with the Atari. It only has 128 bytes of RAM. You heard me correctly, 128 individual little bytes of RAM. That's not enough for a frame buffer. What that means is you can't draw the picture in memory and then just tell the display adapter to draw it. The way the Atari works, and I actually gave this presentation at my first video game, West Virginia Game Developers Expo. the way the Atari works is you have to tell the TV what to draw to the screen. It's actually a very curious television adapter. And it has this chip called the TIA. And when you program the Atari, you actually have to tell it how to draw every scan line. And a scan line on an old TV, you can basically think of it as a single row of pixels. So when you write the Atari program, you have a loop that runs 192 times. That represents every scan line in the frame. So you have to draw not a whole screen, but line at a time. And to do some of the coolest tricks, you actually have to count processor cycles and tell the TIA chip to control the TV at a very specific time in the middle of a scan line. For this reason, programming the Atari is called racing the beam, because the old CRT televisions were basically a screen that the mechanics in the back would just throw a beam of electrons up against the screen, and that would draw the scan lines. And you had to race the beam. You had to be just ahead of that electron beam so that you could tell it what to draw next. Very, very challenging. I have a lot of respect for those Atari 2600 developers. They wrote the games themselves and very often designed them themselves. It was a one-person operation. I was going to say one man, but there were some female developers then too. The developer of River Raid was a female, was a woman, and one of the designers of the great classic multiplayer game Warlords was also a woman. And so yeah, it was women were involved from the very beginning. So after the curiosity phase, it really got me thinking. After playing around with these text-based games and deciding I wanted to start out with my tactical RPG in Python, I started to take things a little bit more seriously, and I started to get pretty excited about it. I began by just trying to learn the fundamentals, and I found this website called Game Programming Patterns. It's an object-oriented look at some of the most common game programming patterns. And some of it, at this time, I was able to read it, comprehend it, and think, okay, that's how you do that. Very cool. I understand that now. All right, I think I can do this. But then there were some parts of the game programming patterns that I thought, I don't even know what they're trying to accomplish. This looks cool, but I don't know why. So I read as much online as I could. And I actually did make an attempt at starting the tactical RPG. And I had a lot of fun doing it. It was great to sit down and think about what I wanted the battles to look like and what kind of characters I wanted to have and the story that I wanted to follow. So it really, I started to get excited, energized, and was ready to tackle this project. This is an animated image of my very earliest attempt at a tactical RPG in Python. This was all it could do. I could move my little character around. I could walk up to a character or a shrub and push the action button, and it would just print something to the console. Nothing else. There was no sound. There were no dialogue boxes. I was really just displaying a map, animating a few characters, and printing some text to the screen. But boy, was this enough to get me excited. I even had to learn how to draw these tile maps. That ended up being a skill in and of itself. And I discovered an open source project called Tiled. Or maybe it's actually not open source, but it's free. It's called Tiled, and it's a free map editor. It's cross-platform, so you can run it on Windows, Mac, or Linux. And Tiled lets you draw tile maps for RPGs or platformers really a lot of different styles of games. You can use tiled for drawing the maps, but it has to be a tile-based map. I'm going to be giving a presentation on that tomorrow because it became one of my most valuable tools. And using tiled to draw the map in this little Pygame window, it really made me feel like I was getting somewhere. I was able to load this map and animate my characters, and I was having fun. But I came across a very big problem, or at least to me, it was a very big problem at the time. I'm a programmer. I'm not an artist. I'm not a composer. I love music, but I've tried to write it many, many times, and I just can't. I'm also not an artist. I can do little pixel edits here and there. I can do some simple graphics edits in the GIMP. If I've got a recipe for how to do something in an image editor, I can do it. I can follow the instructions, but I can't create the art in my head. I can't take what I have in my head and make it happen on paper or on the screen. So I found this very discouraging because, if you want to make your own original game, well, you kind of need some original artwork and music. And for me, music was a key component of video games. Most of my favorite video games also have wonderful music, like the Final Fantasy games. Nobuo Uematsu is the John Williams of the video game world, an incredible composer, especially for those early Final Fantasy games. And the Street Fighter games that I liked all had great music. The Shining Force games also did. Music was big for me. And the fact that I couldn't compose it for my game was a real downer. And the fact that I couldn't make my own artwork was a real downer as well. So in my mind, I thought, well, I'm going to have to hire an artist, I guess. But I don't know very many. I knew some artists, and I asked them, hey, you think you might want to try some video game art? And some of them thought, well, I'm interested in that, but I'm just not very good, and I'm definitely not ready to try. And I got this real sinking feeling that I guess this is a little bit more. I'm swinging for the fence. I'm in over my head. I'm not going to be able to really do this. So I started to dismiss the idea. I doubted it. I thought, no, I can't do this. Best thing I could do was go grab sprite rips from Shining Force. As you can see, it's exactly what I did for this little sample. So for a while, I joked with myself and anybody else I happened to talk to about it that my goal was to make a Shining Force fan game that was good enough to get a cease and desist order from Sega. I figured if I can get a cease and desist, then I've done a pretty good job. So this phase, as excited as I was when I started, I really got down about it later on, and I kind of lost interest in the project just because I thought, well, I don't have the art. I can't do it. But I learned a few things. Yes, I used Shining Force sprite rips to work on the game. But look what I learned. I wasn't using original assets, but I can already say how much I've learned. I had to create animations. I had to respond to user input. I had to display maps. I was creating maps. I was drawing maps. I was learning. And I was learning a lot more than I realized that I was, even though I had no unique original assets of my own. That's okay. You don't have to. You can learn to become a game developer with free assets, or even with intellectual property from another company, as long as you're not putting that out for in the public. I used Shining Force graphics, but it wasn't like I was out trying to sell this. It was just for practice. But I also found that there are some free assets available, and they're great for prototyping and for getting started. You can find free assets on opengameart.com and itch.io. And these aren't the only two. These are just the two that I started with. Excuse me. And that I think I went to most often. There's even things like free sound and music as well. But I also, in hindsight, I know that had I looked a little bit harder, then I would have found what I was looking for. But it was, once again, I kind of had that dismissive attitude. It was like, no, I can't do this. This isn't going to work, you know. So I was now doubting myself quite a bit. But I came back. I kept coming back to it. A project came to my attention called a Makerbuino, and I actually have mine right here. This is it. It's a little Arduino-based handheld gaming system. And it uses old, I think, Nokia telephone screens, monochrome. But I had been writing Arduino projects for several years by this time. I thought they were fun. I love, actually, here's my Arduino Mega board right here. I love the Arduino because it brings back some of that late 70s, 80s DIY spirit. You know, we're actually building circuits and making things happening with sensors and this unique little microcontroller. Well, when I found out that there was an Arduino-based gaming handheld, I thought, well, I gotta try this. I can't pass this up. So it was a Kickstarter. I backed it, and I got my kit. I had to solder the thing myself, which was great. I mean, that taught me how to solder. Very useful skill, by the way. Highly recommended. And so when I finally got it, I thought, well, what am I going to make? What kind of games am I going to make? This is great. Well, I knew that my capabilities on the hardware were pretty constrained. That screen in particular, that's pretty low res, and it's monochrome. For all intents and purposes, it's actually black and white. You can actually set a color to be gray, but what it does is it flashes black so fast that it looks white. Or excuse me, it looks gray. So when I decided to make a few games for this, I thought, well, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a couple of older classics my own way. As a retro gaming fan, I really enjoyed the Intellivision game Astro Smash. I had gotten an Intellivision on eBay by this time and loved playing Astro Smash. I also loved the game Atlantis on the Atari 2600, and so I thought, that's what I'll do. I will make my own Atlantis and my own Astro Smash, except I call it the Lost City and Meteor Smash. You can see these. I've got a couple of animations here showing them in action. And they were very small games. I wrote them using the Arduino editor, by the way, in case you're curious. They were small, and I had to do the graphics myself, which in the Arduino code, to create the graphics, you actually just have to make binary 2D arrays. For those programmers out there, you have to make a two-dimensional array, and a 1 means there's a pixel, and 0 means there's not. That's how you create your graphics. It's actually very similar to how you have to do it on the Atari 2600. It's just literally binary representations of your sprites. But this was a lot of fun. I had to learn so much more about how games work. I was looking into things like finite state machines, and I'm updating projectiles. You know, I've actually got, you know, bullets on the screen, and I'm keeping score and tracking lives. And I'm doing all sorts of game math now. You know, I'm doing trajectories and speeds, x velocities and y velocities and accelerations, and definitely learning so much about game logic. These were terrific lessons in game development. And I kept working on that tactical RPG, even though I doubted myself. Even though I was disappointed that I just couldn't do it because I didn't have the graphics and the sound, I kept up with it because it was still just too much fun. By the way, the maker of the Makerbuino is coming out with a new kit. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but they have a new one that is color screen. Looks very interesting. If anybody's interested in something like this, maybe at the end of the presentation, if anybody has that question, I can go look it up real quick. I'm kind of curious about it myself. It's hard to resist these little types of things. I'm a little bit of a hardware geek as much as I am a software geek too, especially retro style stuff. So I had a very interesting spring of 2017, I think. I was trying to work on the tactical RPG, and I kept looking up more about more articles online, and I just happened to find one, and the article still exists. I've got the URL right here. It's on tootsplus.com, gamedevelopment.tootsplus.com, how to build a JRPG, a primer for game developers. Well, this was perfect. This is great. I read the article, and everything in it made a lot of sense, and it gave me some ideas. But the best part of all, at the very end of the article was a link to a book called How to Make an RPG. And I thought, are you kidding me? This actually exists? Somebody did this? It is a digital book that teaches you how to make a JRPG, like older Final Fantasy style, like Super Nintendo era Final Fantasy style RPG from scratch. And it's not using a game engine like Unity or Godot or Game Maker. It's actually using a framework. So you have to really build it from the bottom up. You're building the whole structure. And the amount of information in this book was incredible. It was just a gold mine. I couldn't believe that I had found it. So I bought it. I spent money on something related to game development. It was the first time I'd actually spent money on something for game development. That made it feel a little bit more serious. And it gave me a little bit more of a feeling of commitment to learning it. I also happened to find a pixel artist. I just happened upon it while searching on the internet one day. This artist sells assets on RPG Maker, and you don't have to use it for RPG Maker. You can just download zip files. And they also draw custom sprites. They do commissions. But the best part was they offered a few free packs of assets, a few different asset sets. And I thought, oh, okay, I could test with these. But I knew that if they worked, that would mean I would have to spend money on the rest of the assets. And they weren't exactly cheap. Well, they are. They're actually very inexpensive. But at the time, for somebody who didn't think I should be taking game development seriously, I thought, should I really be spending that much money on game graphics for something I'm probably never going to make? Remember, I was still pretty doubting myself now. I was still having a lot of fun, but definitely doubting myself. Then, fall of 2017, something really cool happened. I got an email from some folks at Mount West Community and Technical College saying, "Hi, Professor Doolin. We see you have a computer and information technology program at West Virginia Northern, and we would like to invite you and your students to come down to the 2017 West Virginia Game Developers Expo." And I thought, well, that sounds like a lot of fun. You know, I'm not going to be a game developer, but I'd still like to go check this out. This looks like a great event. So I got 4 students together and brought them down to Huntington and attended the expo. I even got to do a presentation on how to program the Atari 2600. It was really the only thing I felt knowledgeable enough about to present. So I did. I showed how to program the Atari 2600. I even had it draw a creeper face. I can still remember it. But I remember being so impressed with the local game development scene. I had no idea that all this was going on roughly right under my nose. Well, maybe more under my feet because, you know, I live in the Wheeling area and all of this was going down a few hours south. But I still had no idea. And I have to give a shout out to one particular project and individual, Jack Dorsey Daniels and Lasso Games. Leventerra was the project that they were really excited about at the time and promoting it a lot at the 2017 Expo. And Leventerra is a cross between Castlevania and the Sid Meier Pirates games. And I thought, what a unique concept. What a great idea. And I loved the retro style. And I just couldn't believe that this was happening so close. That local people were really developing great games. And they weren't the only ones. There were some other amazing projects too. I just wanted to give them a shout out because that stuck with me. I got to talk to Jack for a while, and it was just a very eye-opening experience seeing all of these other game developers, seeing everything going on right here, close enough to my own backyard. I thought, well, hold on, maybe I can do this. Yes, I know I don't have art right now. I don't have music right now, but I think I could buy the art. I know I can. What if I just commit to it? What if I buy the art and you know what? Maybe the music problem will solve itself. Maybe I can find some free music, something like that. And I left that expo so excited, so energized. I thought, I'm going to try this for real. So some lessons from this phase. Very much an up phase. Start small. It's okay to write small games. You don't have to jump right into your big, awesome project. Start with small projects. They're a lot of fun to make, and it teaches you so much that you need to know for game development. Even developing something as small as that little Astro Smash clone taught an amazing amount. Speaking of clones, don't worry about your first games being completely original. If they are, great. Maybe you've got a fantastic idea that can take off. But if not, that's okay too. Write clones. The nice thing about writing clones is you don't have to design anything. You already know how the games work because you've played them. So make the same game happen, okay? Because right at this point, it's just about learning. And you will have fun writing a game, even if it's a clone. Another thing that I learned, don't be afraid to spend some money on some books. If you've got the opportunity, don't be afraid to enter those classes. If you can take game development classes, if that's a practical option for you, I highly suggest it. But don't be afraid to learn on your own as well. And I have some more books. If you're looking for some recommendations, please feel free to contact me. I'm going to give my contact information at the end. I'm always willing to answer questions. I also learned that there are quite a few free assets to practice and prototype. It's really important to just get your idea moving. You don't have to have your original stuff right away. You can pretend that the graphics that you're using to test are going to be just as great and awesome as your original stuff. But I also learned something else very important. There are artists and composers out there willing to help. If they're good, you're probably going to have to pay them. That's okay. They're worth it. And if you're serious about it and you're in the financial position, they are, well, game changers. Also, don't discount the idea of connecting with other artists and composers that you're friends with. If you happen to know some people who also want to get into game development and wanted to create the music or the art, create your own small team. But don't be afraid to look outside your local area as well. My composer and my artist are, actually, I have a couple of artists. One is in England. She's my composer, Harriet Ford, Fair Entertainment. My pixel artist is in the US. And I have another pixel artist that does my high-res stuff and my logo design. She's from Peru. Met them on social media, and they're great to work with. And then my concept artist, if you look behind me, you can see a picture of a couple of characters. That is Thuriana and that is Gwenwyn, two characters. These are made by Julia DeStefano, who is a common exhibitor at the Game Expos. And she's from West Virginia, so she's local. All right. So I leave the expo in 2017. I'm energized. I'm ready. I'm going to do it. I'm going to take it seriously. I bought the Time Fantasy graphics assets. I joined the Discord and I met my composer, Harriet in that Discord channel. How to Make an RPG, the digital book, uses Lua as its primary programming language. And I decided I'm going to move away from Python. I know that a lot of game engines use Lua as their scripting language. Let's find a proper game engine. Well, Love 2D is not exactly a game engine. It's a framework. So you still have to do a lot of the legwork yourself. It's not like Unity, Godot, Default, GameMaker. It's something you've got to write a lot of code. You need to make your own state machines, and you're going to write a lot of your own collision detection, or you're going to use libraries to accomplish it. But it actually made it easier for me because Love 2D was similar to the framework that the author used in How to Make an RPG. So I started making real progress. I was using my new graphics from the pixel artist and getting all of these details of the framework and starting to really make things happen. But by the summer of 2018, I started to get a little, well, worried. I was now spending money, but I thought, uh-oh, can I really do this? I started to see how big this project was. I was now working on my tactical RPG, and the size and the scope of this project started to become apparent. I spent a week fixing one bug, and it made me feel like I was so incompetent. I thought, how could I spend a week fixing just this one bug? Do I really know enough to get into this? You know, should I be taking college classes to learn this stuff instead of trying this on my own? It certainly would have helped. But I started to get intimidated. I was having fun, sure, but the intimidation factor really set in. Games are big. Like, even a 2D tactical RPG is a very big project, not just in content, but in the amount of code that you have to write. The amount of engine and logic that's involved is tremendous. And by now I'm spending money and I'm thinking, am I wasting it? Have I just wasted money on these assets on a project that I can't do? So summer of 2018, I took a break. It also coincided with the beginning of grad school. So I needed some extra time for grad school. And one of my grad school classes was had some project management in it. And I saw some value in the project management skills that I was learning. And I thought, hey, you know what? Maybe what I need to do is actually plan this. What if I planned my project? What if I use some of this project management and actually plot a course, make a timeline, write down everything that I know I'm going to have to do, try to break this giant project into smaller pieces. So I spent the summer of 2018 writing absolutely no code, getting very little done, or well, let's just call it getting very little progress done on the actual game. And I was hoping, fingers crossed, hoping that this would help me figure out how to make this huge project actually happen. I even thought maybe I shouldn't do it by myself. Maybe I should get some other people involved. And that really would be a perfectly legitimate option as well. You don't have to do a game by yourself. Not everybody's going to be able to do a Stardew Valley all on their own. Although I will say Stardew Valley was very inspirational for me. I did play Stardew Valley and think, wow, one guy did this? That's impressive. Maybe I can do this. But by this time I was pretty intimidated, really wasn't sure. Definitely having fun, still taking it serious, but I wasn't sure. And this brings us back to the West Virginia Game Developers Expo in 2018. This time I conducted a workshop on Lua and Love 2D. I felt like I had learned enough about it to actually conduct a small workshop on it, and I did. I had a lot of fun. I showed off some of my Makerbuino games that I had done on that little handheld, and I saw even more great speakers like J-Kid from Wraith Games, and I got to see the guys from Lasso Games again, and many other very interesting projects. And by the end of that expo, seeing all these other people working on these projects, getting this stuff done, it had a re-energizing effect on me. I went from being intimidated to having a completely new sense of determination. I still remember the feeling of leaving the expo that year and saying, at 2019, I'm going to be an exhibitor. So in October of 2018, I decided I was going to exhibit my tactical RPG in 2019. This led, oh wait, I forgot I have this in here. This is what Ballad of Thuriana, my project, looked like in fall of 2018. This is all you could do. These were the free assets from the Time Fantasy graphics set. And this was all you could do. Walk around the map, and I have some animated characters. And so it's not a whole lot more than I could do in that Python game. But I was doing things better this time. I actually had a framework built out for this, and things were moving along. So keep this in mind. This is what it looked like in fall of 2018. The next period was pure enthusiasm. I have never gotten so much work done in a single year as I did in late 2018 and 2019. It was a rush. It was incredible. I've got a list here of what I did month by month. I actually looked it up. I looked at all my Git commits to see what I had been doing. Late 2018, I spent the whole time writing a complete dialogue and text system. February, I wrote the in-game menu system with character stat screens. March, I was working on maps and submaps. April, I built the inventory system. May, equipment, completely implemented shops from start to finish. I was posting on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and getting so much attention on this project. It was just this wonderful sense of accomplishment. It was incredible. I kept going. June, I started the battle system, walkable areas, terrain effects, occupied tiles, giving and dropping items in battle, a mini-map, area of effect targeting for spells and weapons, agility-based turn system. July, cutscenes, melee and ranged attacks, attack spells, heal spells, XP system, level ups. It was amazing how much I was getting done. August, I kept going. September, I know the Game Expo's coming up. I need to get this thing polished up and ready. October was bug fixing mania. And fall of 2019, this is what Ballad of Thuriana was starting to look like. Sorry, these are animated GIFs there. They were taking a moment to load. Here's some examples of my dialogue box, some treasure chests being open, my shop menu, all of this in 1 year. Here's the battle system. Melee attacks. My attack spell in the middle looks really cool. My mini map on the right. I had so much fun. I even got artists. I paid artists to make a logo for the game that you see on the right. And I even came up with my, it's not quite a company yet, but it's going to be called Doolin Digital with a logo and everything. And November 11th, 2019, I exhibited Ballad of Thuriana at the West Virginia Game Expo. I did it. I set out in 2018 to do it, and a year later, I did it. Man, I felt unstoppable. Exhausted after the expo. These things take a lot out of you, but man, I just felt like nothing could stop me. It was awesome. Some lessons. Game development is so fun. It really is. It's something that I never thought I would enjoy as much as I did. Another lesson, get involved with other developers. Start showing your project even early on. I found that Twitter has a great indie developer community on there. A lot of people like to share ideas, encourage each other, connect each other with other projects and other creators, and even asset creators. You can meet artists and composers. I had composers contacting me, which was incredible. So share that progress. People will appreciate what you're doing. I love to see people starting their projects even early on. Don't be afraid to get help. It's okay. You don't have to do everything yourself. And get some testers. testers make a huge difference. And I want to give a shout out and a big thanks to my good friend Andrew, who is an amazing play tester, who has found so many little bugs that I would never have found. And it was a major factor in 2019 to getting a lot of the different features of Ballad of Thuriana working. So Andrew, big thanks, appreciate it. And I promise I will have a new build for you to test by the end of the year. Lastly, I learned, go to game developers conferences. They're energizing, they're fun, you get to meet other developers, you get advice, there are great presentations, they are well worth it. But then this happened. I felt unstoppable leaving that expo. I got a little busy at the beginning of 2020. And then COVID-19. I didn't think that it was going to affect me that much. I thought, in fact, hey, I'm going to be at home more often. I'm going to get all kinds of stuff done on my game. This is going to be even more productive than 2019. I was wrong. First of all, the lockdown started in March, and our school went virtual and online. And there was an awful lot of work involved with that. In fact, my classes were pretty well ready to go, but there were a lot of other additional classes that needed to be adapted, and a lot of instructors who had never done it before. So I, along with a few others in my CIT program, we spent a lot of time helping others kind of get used to it and get their courses ready. But it wasn't just that. Something about this just absolutely drained my creativity. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't get anything done in my game. I got character portraits in dialogue screens done in March 11th of 2020. That's it. In June, I got some other small thing done. I can't even remember what it was, but I know I posted about it on Twitter, and I made a Git commit in June. And I think it was just some quality of life improvements in my inventory system. And that's all. That's all I've done. I did get some character development done. Behind me are bookshelves full of medieval literature. I love medieval literature, and I get a lot of inspiration from the Arthur legend. That's going to be a big part in Ballad of Thuriana. Although I'm not going to have characters like Lancelot and Arthur and Sir Percival. It's inspired by it, but not directly an Arthurian game. I played a lot more video games than I developed. Just something about it drained me, and I was so happy to hear from a few other developers that they experienced the same thing. So this section of my presentation is really for you. You're not alone. If you are a game developer, whether you're a new or experienced developer, and this year just sapped your energy, you're not alone. It did it to me too. It made me feel like, how many indie game projects get off the ground and they're just absolutely on fire, and then they stop. And it made me feel like, am I going to be one of those? Am I going to be that indie project that people thought looked great and then it just dies? I don't want to be that, but I also don't feel like working on it either. It was such a weird feeling. I was feeling down about myself, and I think maybe that made it even worse. The fact that I felt like my project was becoming yet another failed indie project, that I think that made it even worse, and it made it even hard for me to continue working on it. I don't know why. You'd think it would inspire me to go, no, I'm going to get it done. But I don't know. I guess I just wanted to play. So I played Mario. My wife and my daughter and I played a lot of Mario over the pandemic on the Wii. And, I played some other stuff. I just wasn't developing. I didn't stop, but it was a trickle. So how do we get through this? What do we do? What do we do now? If you are drained, if you're not working on your project, first of all, don't beat yourself up. It's happening to a lot of people, and not just even in game development. It's a tough time right now. Between the pandemic trying to stay safe, trying to keep our families safe between, the political climate in our country. We're trying our best to stay connected with each other. But how are we doing that? Well, we're using Facebook and Twitter and social media and our phones and our screens. We're doing that to try to stay connected, and we're also doing that to do our jobs. So are we just, tired of being around screens? It's happening to a lot of us. So don't beat yourself up. It's just draining a lot of us. One thing I was able to do that kept things going is I would comment my code. If you're one of the programmers on a project, I found that documenting and commenting my code at least kept things fresh in my mind. And of course, good documentation is valuable anyway. So even though I wasn't making progress on the game, I was still accomplishing something. Or read your design document. There were evenings where I didn't get anything done on my game, but I read my design documents. I would just open them up and just read, and I would make some changes here and there. I even made a little, I added some new characters and ideas here and there. So it wasn't that I wasn't abandoning the project, but I kept it just fresh enough in my mind. I never lost sight of it. I never closed. Here's something else I did. I never closed my editor. My editor, I use Atom, by the way, for my project, ATOM. It is always open on my workstation. It's kind of symbolic for me. If I have that editor open, I will see it every time I'm at my workstation. And it'll remind me that project is there. It's waiting for me when I get my creative energy back. It also may take some people longer to get back into that saddle than others. We're all different people. We all are going to react differently to our life circumstances. And so some people might be, getting back to it now. Others may still not feel that creative spark. I think it's important to share your game and your ideas with new people. Live conversations, if you can, even if it's a Zoom meeting, talk to somebody that you've never talked to about your project. It might just bring some of that creativity back. There has to be something that you like about your project. I would hope so. If you like your project, talk about it to somebody. That can actually boost that enthusiasm. I want that enthusiasm that I had in 2019. That was epic, and I want to have that back, and I can't wait to get it back. And that's the other thing. I will visualize having it back. I know I'll get there again. In fact, this presentation, just making this presentation, I think has gotten the ball started. Every year I've gone to the West Virginia Game Developers Expo, I have felt renewed and had a new sense of purpose. I'm expecting that again. So what is my next phase? Well, my down phases have always been followed by an up phase, and right now I'm in a down phase. So could I be on the verge of a new up phase? Yeah, I think so. Like I said, just preparing the presentations for this week, that's going to be a big help. I'm also going to redo my project plan. See, the first time I did it, I was new to project management idea. Well, not completely new, but new enough that there's a good chance that I made some mistakes on it. I also wasn't as familiar with my project as I am now. So I'm going to redo my project plan. And I'm hoping that will give me a renewed sense of determination and energy. I also plan on creating some tiled map editor videos for YouTube. I'm going to be doing a presentation on that map editor tomorrow at 11 a.m. Hope to see some of you there. I already have some YouTube videos on this topic, and I'm going to be creating some new ones. That will definitely be a big help with getting my creative energy back. And there's also a really nasty bug in Ballad of Thuriana that's driving me nuts, and I'm going to fix that. That's going to be one of the first things that I do. And I think that just getting past that one is going to be a big sigh of relief. Like, oh, I finally fixed that stupid thing. Now let's move on with cooler stuff. So I want to thank everybody for listening to me today, for letting me share my story with you. I hope I've inspired some of you who are thinking about game development to give it a try. Hopefully my experience is relatable. That's kind of what our whole hope was, that where I've been and the experience that I've had is relatable to others. You can be a game developer. It doesn't have to be your career. And even if you would want it to be a career, it doesn't have to be. It's not mine. Game development's not my career. I mean, I hope to make money from it someday. But I'm still a teacher at Northern. Game development right now is just one of my favorite hobbies. And you don't have to, it doesn't have to be all or nothing if you want to get into game development. You don't have to either be full-blown professional game developer or not at all. You can be a professional in some other area and still do game development on the side. I know many of you out there are doing that. You have day jobs and you have the game development on the side. So thanks everybody for listening. You can follow me on social media at Doolin Digital for all my on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram. That's the account where you'll find the videos for the tiled map editor. My website is doolindigital.com, doolin-digital.com. You can contact me by email at jdoolin@wvncc.edu. Feel free to share your game ideas. Feel free to share your progress. If you have questions, contact me. I'd be happy to answer them. I'm a teacher by nature, and I love to see people succeed. So I would love to hear about your project or about your situation, about whether or not, if you're thinking about game development and you have some other questions I haven't really addressed today, feel free to contact me. I'm open to conversation. So, by the way, that's Thuriana. That's her. That's her little sprite that my artist made for me. So, are there any questions? We've gotten to, wow, the timing was really good. It was exactly 90 minutes. We have, I guess we have plenty of time for a Q&A session, if I'm not mistaken.
If anybody does have any questions, feel free to pop them into the chat. And thank you very much, Jeremy, for your presentation today.
It was a pleasure. It was, like I said, it was very helpful for me getting me back into the saddle. This is what I needed. I needed to be in contact with other creators, and just being able to share my experience, share my the ups and downs. This is going to help me. You know, I can't believe how much the pandemic affected me. So I'm very excited now to get back into it. I cannot wait to start posting things on Twitter and having that energy that I did last year. So thank you for having me. I need to get to work on my website a little bit more too. I have some blog articles on there that I wrote over the summer. They weren't so much creative as they were just kind of a reminiscing about gaming in the old days. You know,
right?
Those were fun to write, and it didn't take a whole lot of creative energy because it was just remembering things that had happened.
When was your last blog?
It's a series that I call Experience Points, Memories of a Lifelong Gamer. And so the last one was, I started talking about the 16-bit wars, which would have been back in September. I posted that one. Also, looking this up, the little handheld Arduino based handheld kit. I'm looking up the new one.
Yeah, I started looking that up after you had mentioned it.
Yeah, I just can't remember the name of it. Unless they're not selling it yet. It has a cute little name. It's like, it doesn't sound like Arduino. I just can't remember the name of the project now, but it's still the same concept, but it's more powerful. It's an ESP8266 microcontroller, if you're familiar with that. That's becoming a very popular maker's processor. And a lot of people are programming those with Arduino. Let's see if I can find that. It is called Nibble, NIBBLE. It is their new DIY game console that does everything Makerbuino did, but better and faster. So look for it. It's the company is called Circuit Mess, and the project is called Nibble, NIBBLE. So, David, I have to ask, were you affected by the pandemic?
Yes, actually, the same kind of situation as you I was in that in 2018, I went to the Expo and I said, a year from now, I'm going to present something. And I did that last year.
Yeah, you did. I remember seeing it. Yep.
And this past year has been very interesting. I've actually been working in part with part of our next stream with Remake West Virginia and doing some things with Corey and that. And I haven't worked too much on a lot of personal stuff as far as video game development goes, but we have a very similar story in that Dungeons and Dragons is a big part of my life, and me and another friend have actually been putting a lot of time into our own campaign setting, which is also doubled over as the similar world as to what the game that I had presented last year would have taken place in. So it's still game development in a sense, just not direct, just not directly with any video games. I do have the link for the Nibble. I'm actually going to go ahead and post that in the chat there.
Sure, yeah.
So that way, if anybody is interested, they can check that out. But I've been in things. Yeah, I've got all my dice set right here beside me. So
yep.
Actually, we do have a question there.
Planning on future podcast episodes. I don't have a podcast actually, but I talked to somebody last year at the Expo that does, and I never followed up on that. But I've been told I have a radio voice, so maybe I should at least take part in a few podcasts. I was actually, I take that back. I was on a podcast for a while, and it was just sort of a fun little thing that a few friends and I did. So I'm a big fan of Shining Force,
right? And
this was called the Shining Podcast, and it was a Shining Force podcast. We just talked about the Shining Force games, and we had done, I think, 4 or 5 episodes maybe, where we talked about each game in the series, and we still had plans for more, but once again, pandemic concerns. I think even before that, the guy who was running the podcast was looking at changing the format, and then the pandemic hit. Right. Everybody's creativity was killed at that point.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, wow. So you were familiar with it. Cool. I love it. Yeah, the Twitter activity is another thing that I really should get back into, that indie game dev Twitter community, because I was surprised how positive it was. I resisted Twitter for so long because I heard horror stories. All Twitter's, you think Facebook's bad. Wait till you see Twitter. You don't even get started. I thought, ooh, okay, yeah, I guess not. But everything I read about promoting your game was share it on Twitter, share it on social media. You've got to get it out there. Start building your community early. So I thought, okay, well, let's do it. But I was really pleasantly surprised at how great the indie dev community is on Twitter. There are so many good developers out there who are experienced. Some are really experienced, and some are brand new, just learning the ropes. And it's a positive environment where people are willing to, support each other, congratulate each other. They'll test for you. They'll write compositions for you.
Right. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of inspiration to be had from just going on Twitter. As a pixel artist myself, there's a handful of people that I see on Twitter all the time that are posting various things, and I'm like, I want to get to that level.
Yeah. It even helped inspire me a little bit with some pixel art. I can't do much, but there are a few things in Ballad of Thuriana that I can claim for myself.
Right.
I've done some icons, just little stuff and little edits, but yeah, I really respect all the pixel artists out there, and there are lots of pixel artists and composers perfectly willing to help with a project. If you've got good ideas, or you're a programmer and you just need help with those assets, the people who can do it are out there, and many of them are looking for projects to work on. I've got recommendations. If you need recommendations, I can even do that. Contact me. I can recommend some of the composers who have contacted me that are looking for projects. I even told them I would do that.
That's definitely a good thing to have. Any other questions or anything else you want to add there, Jeremy?
I don't think so, aside from just being glad to be back in contact with people who are doing the same projects and who have been in the same position too. Yeah, it really stinks that we can't be face to face. I know everybody's getting a little tired of the virtual formats for so many things, Zoom meetings, and it's not how human beings are used to interacting.
Right.
But it's better than the alternative. And that's to not have it at all. I cannot wait until we get to have another one in person. I've got my fingers crossed that 2021 is going to be a much better year for the pandemic, that we can get things under control, vaccines, whatever we need to do so that next year's Expo we can have in person. And, maybe next year's Expo in person, I'll be exhibiting Ballad of Thuriana again, and it'll be in it'll be much farther along than it is now.
I'll be looking forward to that.
Yeah.
I have one final question for you, Jeremy, and you may have covered it, but I just want to make sure I put the passion out here for this. I know that you're currently editing and doing your work on a Mac. I'm a Mac person. I just want to make sure and pitch out there that I'm going to be able to play this on my Mac. So please, please, please make sure when this is all said and done, I can play this on my Mac.
That's one of the nice things about Love 2D. I can make this run on just about anything. It will run on Windows. I've already got Windows builds. I've got a script for building a Windows build. I develop it on a Mac. The Linux build works nicely. I had it running on FreeBSD. I mean, Love 2D doesn't have real tremendous requirements. I know somebody has a few Love 2D projects on the Switch. So if I get the game far enough and Nintendo likes it, I can theoretically get it on the Switch.
Forget what I said. So. Please make it on the Switch. Never mind. Make it on the Switch. That'd be amazing.
Sure.
Yeah, it's tough to get into Nintendo. Basically, you have to call them and say, "Can I pretty please have a developer's kit?" and then they just say, "Nah, we don't think your project's far enough along later." Actually, they don't even give you that information. They just say, "Nah." But I'm definitely a cross-platform developer. It will work on as many things as possible. I'm hoping. I'm not hoping. It will be. Atari's got a new system out there, and I'm one of those weird people that cares about it. See. Here's my shirt. The new Atari VCS is like a console PC hybrid, where it's got the Atari OS, where you're going to be able to play some retro Atari games and some new indie games, and it's got Plex and all sorts of cool stuff. But it also has an open PC mode where you can install any OS you want. And so for somebody like me that loves to build and hack and create, this is going to be awesome. And I do plan on my game being available for the Atari VCS native. So if there happens to be one or two people out there that care about the VCS, I'm on it.
Well, I'm sure there's some people who would love to have.
Yeah, I'm a backer. I'm waiting for it. It should be here by the end of the month. All right. Well, David, again, thanks a lot for having me. I've had fun today, and I hope everybody else has fun at the rest of the Expo. Get out and catch some of those other presentations. I know I'm planning on it.
For sure.
And hopefully see some of you tomorrow at 11.
All right, we'll be there.
All right. Thanks, David.
Thank
Bye.
you, Jeremy.